All right, good evening. 6:30 p.m. where I am, and I'm not ready to get started. My voice is a little unclear because I guess I just had dinner. So let me clear my throat a little. I'm looking at today. I'll be looking at Martin Luther King's speech Beyond Vietnam. One of the lesser known speeches, because I just hadn't heard of this particular speech before. But I think this particular book, it tends to want to not like overdo things that most people who have already graduated high school have heard of. So I think that's kind of the idea behind a lot of the selections in this anthology. So I think that's why we're going to Beyond Vietnam in this book. And so far out of the readings that I have done in this book, I've not been disappointed. So I'm just sort of looking forward to seeing some of Martin Luther King's later thinking. What I already know about Martin Luther King is that towards the end of his life, after some of the successes in achieving some of the more practical, more immediate, more even just sort of like intuitive in the sense of just like showing the way that Black people were getting treated in the South. And it was vicious when you when you took pictures of it, like visibly showing the injustices in the South, the inequality in the South, the oppression in the South. As the movement gained momentum, Martin Luther King, what I understand or what I remember is that he started expanding to beyond just what we know him for today, which is like the equal treatment of Black and white. Instead, or encompassing that, he actually moved on to talking about like socio-economic justice, and he's speaking out against militarism, which is what Beyond Vietnam must be about. So those are some guesses just from my base knowledge right now. So as you can tell, I don't actually know too much. So I'm gonna get into it and try to figure out what makes this speech significant, interesting, noteworthy, worth reading, and for that I call that the pre-reading. So I'll get into that just now. But I'm realizing I should probably make a quick announcement on some things, which is I've signed up for the March SAT. So I will be taking the March SAT, and right now, it's actually not a lot of time. I think there's maybe 2 weeks left. So it's pretty last minute, but I'm going to have to kind of come up with some sort of study plan, basically, because I hadn't seen the math section in years. So I'm going to have to, and plus I don't think my math is actually that good right now, and I've never seen the new SAT math. I honestly don't know if I'm even going to really bother studying for it. I just mainly wanted to do it for the reading and the writing sections. But let me know if you are watching this and you are going to take the SAT at some point, like what kind of content you would be interested in seeing, and that would help me sort of plan like my next couple weeks. All right, guys. So that's the announcement aside. Let's go back to Martin Luther King Jr. I'm looking at this book, this anthology, The Glorious American Essay. First, there's going to be a little excerpt about Martin Luther King Jr. himself. Okay, so I'm going to start there. Then I'm gonna just quickly scan the sort of introduction of this essay. The introduction essay of this anthology, to see what he says about Martin Luther King Jr. in the introduction essay, about why the editor might have selected it. And so that shouldn't take too much time, just to skim through those parts. I'm going to try to set my expectations for what this speech is, and then I want to see what noise or what impact this particular speech might have made in society or on people. In particular, I care less about like academic intellectualizing and more about, wow, this changed me, or it affected me, like more of a personal connection, and that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Because when you're doing readings for school, a lot of times it becomes purely intellectual in a way that's kind of disassociated from the reality, the genuine emotion and the power and the impact of a speech like this. So I want to make sure that I kind of connect to maybe what some other people were connecting to, so that I can at least be on a similar wavelength, or at least I can know what wavelengths people were on when they're reading the speech or when they're thinking about the speech. All right, so that's the pre-reading. Let's get right into it, starting over here. He did not stop there, but broadened, which is what I was remembering. Economic justice for, and that's literally the same order that I said it. So it seems like I kind of read it beforehand, but I actually hadn't. This is my first time reading this. Lesser known, but daring, but more daring. So that's an interesting word to hold on to. So this is a perhaps more daring speech. He began by directly addressing the challenge. What right did he have to speak about the war? He's now increasingly seen as a political philosopher rather than just a particular activist for a particular problem at a particular time, but someone... Sorry, my computer just hiccuped for a second, but okay, I think we're good. So yes, it's not just a particular political actor at a particular time for a particular problem, but someone who has a philosophy on the way society should be. And maybe, and I guess beyond Vietnam is kind of an instance of where he broadened out to more of a larger societal issue. Now, I'm actually just gonna do a search. Martin Luther King. And what I'm doing is I'm just looking for the introduction, just to see what I forgot the name of this. Hang on, what's the name of this? Philip Lopati. I don't know how to pronounce that name. Just to see what Philip Lopati, I'm going to say Lopati even though I feel like I'm mispronouncing it, might have had in mind. I want to know what he had in mind when he chose this speech. But there isn't much. Not in this introduction. Because this is the only time that... Let me see if beyond Vietnam is mentioned in this introduction essay at all. And no, it's not mentioned in this essay at all. So I'm going to go back to Beyond Vietnam. Okay, so that's Beyond Vietnam. According to Philip Lopate. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the internet. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of research to figure out what wavelength some people were at when they were reading this or hearing the speech. Beyond Vietnam speech. Okay. So apparently I saw this. Probably I saw it last week while kind of selecting the text. But this is the speech itself. So skipping that. There's a Stanford associated King Institute. That's kind of interesting. The Vietnam War King Institute again. Why I am? It's a strange question. Let's look at, okay, this Wikipedia article. Let's go. A time to break silence from a course. It looks like a course description. Interesting. And this is interesting too. From 3 years ago to 3 years ago, the MLK speech we need today is not the one we remember. Interesting. And maybe even the story. That might be interesting. Now, I want to see if I can get something from readers. So besides like journalists and politicians talking about maybe the impact at a societal level, okay, because that's cool and interesting, and that might be relevant. But before going straight into like the huge society level issues, I want to start with just people. So I do want to go into, that might be an interesting page to look at, but I do find that reading the quotes reading famous quotes from a work beforehand tends to make them pop out when they actually come out. So I think that's kind of interesting to go through. Beyond Vietnam gets mentioned in this particular book. Because remember, Beyond Vietnam is not a full book, so in Goodreads you're not going to be able to find a full book on it, probably. Although we'll see what this is. And I'm going to move on. Oh no, this one's kind of interesting. This is a specific review of a different book, but I want to go into that real quickly. So I'm just gonna see which one. Right now I'm not gonna read every single one of these. Like, whoops! I'm just realizing I didn't put my window in the right position for you to read it. All right, so that's just me being all right. So I think you can see everything, right? Yeah. It's one of the inconveniences right now of not being at home in Korea, where I have a separate monitor. So I'm looking at the King Institute's comment. They have an encyclopedia apparently, okay, and within this encyclopedia it talks about Beyond Vietnam. So he delivered the speech at the Riverside Church condemning the war, which, I probably should have predicted that. No other choice, because it had deleterious, harmful effects on the poor in America and also the peasants in Vietnam. Okay. Now, 1965. Man, I'm actually really forgetting. So, okay, I'm really forgetting what a lot of these. Let's see. In history, I'm trying to figure out the historical situation of these things that I'd learned previously, but I'm no longer remembering. So Brown versus Board of Education was in 1954, okay, and it said that segregation was unconstitutional in schools. Okay, so that's 1954. Cool. And then the Equal Rights Amendment, this happened. Hang on, I think this is later than. Wow, this is really hard to. There's a lot to read there. This is in the 70s, but there was a Voting Rights Act. There we go. That's what I was looking for. The Voting Rights Act. Right, this is 1965. Now I'm looking at Beyond Vietnam, which is 2 years later, which makes sense. Why? Right, Martin Luther King was fighting for the right to vote at first. That was one of the biggest. That was what Selma was about. And Beyond Vietnam. And when did the Vietnam War actually start? Or at least when did the American involvement start? 1964 was the Gulf of Tonkin. That was late 1964. Okay, so that's a crazy time, honestly, in history. That must be an insane time in history. So, all right, I think that was some historical background that's just sort of settling. I want to know, what was the nation going through at this time. And I think that's helping me right now a little bit. Peace, survival, anti-war. Then there's a Los Angeles speech. Then, okay, so this is just the background. The immediate, here we go. Interesting. This is great. This is what I was basically, because this is going to summarize, I think. Let me just double check this right now. A radical revolution of values, emphasizing love and justice rather than economic nationalism. See, this is for him. Oh, yeah. This is why you don't get taught this, because it's even it's against the mainstream of the American thought at the time, which was they were in the Cold War, so we're supposed to fight communism, and for Dr. Luther King, that was just a symptom of American colonialism, which is a very strongly opposing position. And so the immediate response was largely negative. Washington Post, New York Times were critical, and King's speech had diminished his usefulness to his cause. And even the NAACP, and I don't know, Ralph, I'm gonna skip because I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but even black allies were against this speech. So that's interesting. If I was like super interested, then I might even go and look for the actual original article where they were criticizing him. I think that would be very interesting to read. But I do have to be cognizant of time because of my next arrangement. So I'm going to move on. This is the Vietnam War article, so I'm going to skip that. This is a Wikipedia article. He also received a Nobel Peace Prize and had some influence in the civil rights movement. A mistake on King's part. Now we can actually probably find this article. Yeah, right there. A tragedy is literally the title of that article. And Dr. King's error. Man, that's those are harsh words there. Others called it his most important speech. You know what would be really interesting to know, okay? And I want to say this before I go in. It sounds like from the clues I've had so far, Martin Luther King himself was also a little hesitant to just straight out condemn the war. First, as the excerpt, as the blurb from the anthology said, he had to justify why he is even qualified to speak about such a matter. Which means that he knew what he was saying was a hard sell. So he needed to sort of earn the people's willingness to listen. Credibility. So I'm just thinking it'd be really interesting to know in the lead up to the speech, what was the pushback he was getting and what made him decide to still go on with it anyway. I don't know if I'll be able to find something, because that's kind of a broad question, but I kind of want to know like what kind of made him kind of sharpen his thinking in this direction, even though it was going to be controversial. Okay, the first thing is he was trying to avoid the potential pushback on the movement. Muhammad Ali was very outspoken, so that actually helped him. Now, Muhammad Ali was also a very vocal presence in America. He was, I think, even more militant in his views than Dr. Martin Luther King. Not totally sure, but yes, there was a sort of John the Baptist. What do you call John the Baptist? The guy who goes out in front and says all the crazy things and prepares the way for Jesus. But yeah, like not the vanguard, but yeah, there was already somebody who was a forerunner for MLK. Occupy it as an American colony. Serious moral change. Okay, so this is helpful because it's just summarizing maybe what the argument is. To take the profit out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries. This is not just. Okay, cool. So it's pretty spicy stuff. I wonder too, at that I know that there was a lot of opposition to the Vietnam War, especially in like Berkeley. And there was the Ohio State University incident. Am I wrong? Because it seems like I'm not totally wrong. No, it seems like I'm kind of wrong. University. Here, what does Khan Academy say? Was it just Berkeley? Okay, I'm gonna, especially after 1965, the students were also pretty much hey LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Strong words. Okay, maybe I might be mixing up my American history here. So bad. I was trying to see what maybe, like, I wonder what percentage of King's audience was like college educated, and I wonder how popular it was at the very moment in 1967 when he gave this speech. How popular it was, how much popular support there was for the Vietnam War. Maybe earlier, like in the first 2 years of the war, maybe it was still enjoying a lot of support, and maybe it only started dropping off like a couple years after Martin Luther King gave the speech, by which point he was already assassinated. I think he died a year later. So I wonder about that situation. His evolving political advocacy in his later years, this is something I mentioned earlier. He guarded his language in public to avoid being linked to communism, but he did sometimes speak of socialism. Just looking. His stance on Vietnam, this is some impact that it had. It encouraged anti-war Democrats. Okay, and that's something that happened. The most controversial speech of his career, and the one he labored over the most. It was also sampled in Linkin Park and Ai Weiwei, and I don't know this particular band. Okay. This is the actual. Wait, hang on. No. Yeah, it's just the text itself. I think I'm gonna wrap up pre-reading soon, because right now we're just talking about people talking about how important it is. Many were against him. Okay. They wanted him to focus on something less controversial, like the poor, the domestic concerns of African Americans and the poor. And it's something that we actually deal with today. A lot of times when somebody has a large platform because they've become extremely popular or a lot of people listen to them, we start putting a lot of pressure on the kinds of things that they focus on. Because it's like, when you already have the platform and the ability to speak to, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people, what you say becomes highly controversial, even if the content itself is not bad. Like the fact that you are focusing on that rather than on X rather than Y, sometimes that itself is a huge sticking point for people who are very prominent. Which is why most sort of trained, I think, celebrities kind of just say very boilerplate, uncontroversial, smooth opinions that are not sharp at all, just to kind of get over it all. Whereas, because you're only one person, but like a million people might be talking back at you, right? When you are just a Martin Luther King, when you're just one figure, really committing to saying something that people will disagree with, I think that has a disproportionate cost on that one person. Which is, probably, I don't know if you can avoid that. It's just what happens when you're very prominent. But, it's just the reality that Martin Luther King must have been pretty stressed out preparing the speech, knowing how prominent he was. Children on... Wow. Yes, I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this again. I'm looking over here. He had already fallen off the list of most admired Americans. 168 newspapers. This is way more colorful. Okay, this is kind of more interesting. And LBJ disinvited King. It ruins the relationship. Oh man. Okay, this is way spicier. And this is an interview, and I don't think I'm gonna go right. I'm not gonna go into this interview. It's, I think, a little too long. I already got part of what I wanted there. Now, there's only one quote on Goodreads for this, which is, "Here's the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence when it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves." Okay. Seems wise. Not very quotable, but very wise. Gonna move on. For students. Hey guys, by the way, if you ever want to get more into the thought of Martin Luther King Jr., then this is probably this might be a decent to read. 4.46 is pretty high for Goodreads. So yeah, maybe this is something you can get into. But moving on to this particular review, fascinating. Spectrum, victim's perspective, Vietnamese War. The tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was also sending the poor at home to fight and die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties that they didn't even have in Harlem. For dying together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. Wow. Well, yeah, that's pretty intense, man. That's an intense passage, and I'm glad that it seems like it was a student that wrote that, but I'm glad that they shared. I'm kind of curious, maybe is there anything else about Vietnam? Now, by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but there is a specific review search function in Goodreads, so I think this is kind of useful. This is just a bunch of quotations, so I'm going to skip that. maybe this is a little... Oh, there's only one more review, so let me just go into that. I didn't even know he spoke out against Vietnam. Okay, cool. I think I'll just leave it here. I don't know if we're going to be able to find much more here. There's no reviews for this particular book, so I'm going to skip that. The Radical King and In the Beyond Vietnam speech, everything he was saying could be applied to today. Different wars, same problems. Now, speaking of which, there is a war going on in Ukraine right now, and I realized I didn't say anything. And I should say, I can say something. I don't know if everyone always has to have an opinion about everything, but I can say one thing. It took a lot of energy out of me to hear that this was happening yesterday. I spent basically all morning sort of like brooding on it and reading probably way too much about it. And I just want and I'm hearing words like World War III and like we haven't seen anything like this in 70 years. I'm hearing comments like that. Simultaneously, I'm also hearing responses like what did you do when Syria was going through a war? What about all the other wars that are happening right now besides in Ukraine? Do you only care when it's Europe? And it's complicated. It's complicated for me because as a Western-born, Western-raised son of the West, despite being an Asian, ethnically, a Korean ethnically, I'm educated in this milieu, so it's hard not to have a sort of Eurocentric, Western-centric viewpoint on things. Because I don't think it's wise to be like, hey, the suffering of Ukraine doesn't matter. I don't think anyone wants to make that particular argument. So I think the one thing that could be said with some certainty and with some moral conviction, with moral clarity is politically there might be all these reasons why the U.S. and the Russia and the NATO situation kind of blew up the way it did. And we can point and as politicians, it's kind of their jobs actually to point the blame at the others. But what I know is right now there is incredible suffering and fear and turmoil in the lives of people, and this is a huge cost from a human standpoint. It's a cost that as society we shouldn't have to bear, and that human suffering being expanded and maximized, I don't think that's good. It hurts to think about the suffering of people, and so there's so many different actions that people can take. I think the one that I think everyone should take, kind of regardless of what your background or thoughts or political persuasion or spiritual or moral persuasions may take you. I think one thing to really agree on and move forward on is that we should learn more about war and the cost of war and the impact of war and what it does. We could even philosophize about can war ever be just and stuff like that. But I don't think that's the first step. I think the first step is just to acknowledge the costs of war and pray if that's what you do, and pray and start there. Have your heart in the right place. So we actually can draw potentially some connection between this speech from 55 years ago, almost exactly 55 years ago, and our situation today. So maybe that's another angle that we can take as we read this, which I'm about to get into starting now. What am I expecting from this speech? I'm expecting actually that I won't be that surprised. And here's why. I think I've heard a lot about these ideas through hearsay from my friends and also from media that I've consumed who are active actively fighting for racial justice. I've heard that Dr. Martin Luther King is not merely the person we've been taught about in schools. I've heard that he cared a lot about economic and social justice beyond the issues of race. I heard that also, people were trying to malign, sort of like impugn communism on him, and that he was going through a lot of opposition. And there was a really moving scene in Selma, just watching him being harassed. Selma, the movie, watching him being harassed, him and his family being harassed by the FBI. So those are ideas I'm aware of, that he was not just this cookie cutter perfect man in American history. He had certain complex ideas that were hard to accept for a lot of people. So I don't think I'm going to be too surprised by it. But what I know about Martin Luther King also tells me that the force of rhetoric, the force of the way that he writes, the way that he speaks is so powerful. I am kind of curious how he conveys and navigates this kind of tricky situation that he's in, trying to say something very controversial. So I am looking forward to seeing that particular thing. Let's go into it right now with the reading. Oh, I just realized I didn't share my screen, right? Yep. Starting with good feelings. Also, he's surrounded by other people, other very prominent people. Which means that to some extent they must have kind of known what he was about to say. So it's interesting to think about. I don't know how that would affect the speech, but I do think it would make it feel a little safer to speak. And maybe even the background of this particular church, maybe Riverside Church is a church that happens to be pretty against the Vietnam War. We'll see. My conscience leaves me no other choice. There is an organization, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. So it's a church organization that is concerned about Vietnam. Now, notice how neutral that wording is. It's not against Vietnam, any of that, but it's just concerned about. So there was a bubbling of a movement there, and that he was part of it. Silence is betrayal. Okay. Men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in times of war. Time of war. Conformist thought within one's own bosom makes you apathetic. And so you have to move your spirit out of that apathy, and that is difficult. Uncertainty can mesmerize us, can kind of make us stuck. We must speak. It's agonizing. We must speak. We must speak. We must rejoice as well. Okay, interesting side comment here about how religion and the state, the government, relate. Over the past 2 years, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, people have questioned him. Why are you speaking about this? Why are you joining these voices? Peace and civil rights don't mix. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people that they are not supposed to be connected? I am saddened by this because they don't really know me. They don't know my calling. They don't know the world in which they live. So this is a pretty long preamble. What he's doing is he's still just setting up. You know what this sounds like? It sounds like his audience was maybe not 100%, or like clearly not 100%, maybe not even 50% in support of his views yet. You know, maybe they were, it's like a speech that he has to give where he is trying to persuade against the current. That's what it sounds like, because he's doing a long preamble. North Vietnam, he's not trying to turn the North or the communists into paragons of virtue. So he's not not going to be black and white about this. Conflicts are never resolved without trustful give and take. So I am not speaking with Hanoi and I'm not speaking with the North. I'm speaking to the north of Vietnam, the communist Vietnam. I'm speaking to my fellow Americans. Seven reasons for bringing Vietnam into my focus. Now that's interesting. That's a long list. So so I'm actually a little surprised that it's 7. It's kind of a lot, but let's get into it. I will be honest though, hearing 7, it kind of made me like, oh my god, this speech is maybe not going to be super fun. So it did kind of decrease my enthusiasm for this speech right now. To be honest. We'll see what happens. So there's an obvious connection, okay? Because there's a poverty program, experiments, hopes, new beginnings. And this poverty program is for black and for white. And he was building it in America, but it actually got eviscerated because of the war. And America is not going to send money this way anymore because of the war. This Vietnam is like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So it made me see the war as an enemy of the poor. Now this is number 2. That the war was also doing more than just hurting the poverty program and hurting the poor at home. It was actually getting them to die in a world 8,000 miles away. I just read this in the pre-reading. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens. I find it interesting that he always says black and white. On TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them burning the huts of a poor village, but they can't even live on the same block in Chicago. Okay, so that is and I already reacted to this in the pre-reading, but it's a cruel irony. Okay, I read 2 out of 7 already, and I'm like, okay, no, this is not that boring. This is interesting. Let's go. My third reason: experiences in the ghettos. The desperate, rejected, angry young men. I told them violence will not solve your problems. I tried to give them compassion, non-violent action, but then their argument is, well, what about Vietnam? Vietnam, the nation is using, the state is using violence, so how come we can't use violence? So then he was like, oh my God, I cannot condemn your violence unless I equally condemn the violence of the government. That's a hard position to be in. That's a hard position to be in, man. Because he's so prominent. Just note that Malcolm X represented the most popular was the most popular speaker of the more militant wing of, I don't know if wing is the right word, but of a more militant approach to racial equality in America. And I don't think Martin Luther King directly incited, I don't think Malcolm X ever directly incited violence, like, let's plan this out and cause violence. But, I think the sort of aura around Malcolm X was that he had a more violent ethos. So, it wasn't just so as a young black person thinking about all the injustices that you're going through in the 1950s, you couldn't even vote in the 1950s. You couldn't even you couldn't even go to the same schools in the 1950s. So and you were being treated like second class citizens. It was explicit. It was explicit that you were inferior. For the angry young men, they would want to fight back. And Martin Luther King is trying to put together a Christian movement that encompasses most of Black America, so that, because he believes that is nonviolent resistance is what's going to win. It's a tough place to be. Because it's hard to win this argument if you don't also condemn the United States of America. But this is, by the way, for me, this is maybe less emotional than like number 2, but this third reason for me kind of convinces me of or sort of clarifies for me one of the main questions I already had, which was, what is the connection for him between racial justice, equality, and justice, and sort of a broader global justice, and the connection is actually state violence, which is kind of an interesting connection there. I was not something I would have predicted. Now let's move on. Aren't you a civil rights leader? Which means, aren't you not the same as a pacifist? Interesting, right? It's interesting that you get categorized that way. To save the soul of America, this is not just about certain rights, like the rights to sit next to white people and to attend the same schools and to vote, but also the conviction that America would never be free or safe from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles they still wear. I don't see what this logic is here fully, but okay, I'm just gonna keep reading. No one can ignore the war. So this is the soul of America. This is a sort of broad, sort of moral or spiritual argument. Okay, I think this is number 5. the Nobel Peace Prize. So I assume this is going to refer. He obviously meant 1964, the year. Yes, okay. Hang on. 64, not 54. Yeah. And then I think this is reason number 6. Commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. The ministry obviously means that you should make peace. So sometimes I am dumbfounded. I marvel at the people who are asking me why I'm speaking against the war. Did they not know that the good news of the gospel was meant for everyone, for communists and for capitalists, for the children and for black and for white? What then can I say to the Viet Cong or to Castro or to Mao? Can I threaten them with death? And this is the 7th one. I am a son of the living God, just like every man, beyond race or nation or creed. I am a son, and everyone is my brother. I speak for the suffering. It's broader and deeper than nationalism. It's beyond our nation's goals and positions. We are to speak for the weak, the voiceless, the victims. The madness of Vietnam. That is a powerful sentence. They must see Americans as strange liberators. They proclaimed their own independence in 54, or in 45 rather. Okay, so it must have been in 1945. They were led by Ho Chi Minh. They quoted the American Declaration of Independence, and we refused to recognize them. Instead, we decided to support France. Our government felt then, this by the way is making me highly, it's raising my blood pressure. It pisses me off. Okay. Our government felt then that the Vietnamese people were not ready for independence, and we again fell victim to that deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long. A revolutionary government seeking self-determination. We refused that. We rejected it. Just because the indigenous forces included some communists. For the peasants, this new government meant real land reform, something they really needed. See, because I like this. See, as I ponder the madness, my mind goes to the people of that peninsula. And I think this is the right, by the way, I think this is the right moral approach to have when you are thinking about things like Ukraine. Think of the people at the human level. Not the ideologies and the ideas and the things that we talk about at a high level, but things that we feel and see at the human level. Man, that's rough. For 9 years, we denied them their independence, even though they quoted our own Declaration of Independence. We vigorously supported the French in trying to recolonize Vietnam, and we were even meeting 80% of their war costs. So is this the French Indochina War? Is that what that is? Oh man, I don't know what that. I don't actually. I'm so bad at history now. I don't know. After the French were defeated, that independence and land reform might come again. And we supported one of the most vicious modern dictators because the United States kept the nation divided. The peasants watched and cringed as Diem rooted out all opposition, supported their extortionist landlords, and refused even to discuss reunification with the North. Dude, when Diem was overthrown, they may have been happy, but there was no change in this long line of military dictators. The only change came from America as we increased. So they got rid of Diem. Okay, I'm pausing here. You know what's crazy? For all that I know about how like American youth were extremely anti-war, as far, and I don't know if it's, when we say extreme, I don't know if that's like 60% or even, or 80% or like 40%, but I know there was a big movement against this war. Even though I know that, it's crazy because I never really heard just this particular story, like ever. And I'm hearing it from Martin Luther King from 55 years ago. Or if I don't remember hearing this. This feels like new information to me. We were supporting corrupt, inept, and unpopular governments. Now these people consider the Americans the real enemy. And we take them off of the land of their fathers into concentration camps. Or they will be destroyed by our bombs. So they go. They watch as we poison their water and kill their crops. They weep as the bulldozers roar through the areas, destroying the trees. They wander into hospitals. And out of the hospitals, out of 21 people in the hospitals, one of them is hurt by the Viet Cong and 20 are hurt by the Americans. We may have killed 1 million of them, mostly children. They wander, homeless, without clothes, in packs. Children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers. You know, I wish it weren't true. I wish it weren't true. This makes me upset. You know, it makes me upset. It makes me upset because at this time, yes, there was Russia, but the US was a dominant world power. And what did we do with that? What did the US do with that power? Okay. And we ally ourselves with the landlords. I mean, just by the way, guys, if I don't know how old you may be, yeah, but if you hit the age of, I mean, it kind of depends on everyone, but like, let's say by the time you're 30, you know, you might have had several years of experiences with landlords. There's a definite divide between the haves and the have-nots. When it comes to something as clear as land, and siding with the haves is one of these things that you can do that no one can stop you from doing. You can side with the haves your whole life, and you might die as one of the haves. It's just that. What is your contribution to this earth before you leave, you know? Anyway, moving on. We make promises concerning land reform, but we don't follow through. We test out our latest weapons on them. We've destroyed their families and their villages, their land, their crops. We've crushed the only non-communist political force, the Buddhist Church. We've supported the enemies of the peasants. We have corrupted their women and children and killed their men. Corrupted in this case is basically synonymous with rape. Oh man, this is it's honestly, it's painful. Oh dude, I'm struggling right now. It's just painful. Give me a sec. All right, let's go. One thing I'm noticing is just, it seems like, Martin Luther King, I don't know how intentionally he did it, but he has done his research. And he came up with as specific of examples as possible so that people will be able to imagine this not at a abstracted, rarefied political level, but at a sort of more raw, physical, tangible, human level. And he really... he must have labored to kind of put this together in a way that was easy for people to imagine. Oh. Whoa. Hang on. He just says these two are our brothers. Then remember his reason number 7. His reason number 7 is, I am compelled to speak by my belief that I am a son of God just like everyone. And everyone, so far he has been talking primarily about the weak, the downtrodden, the peasants of Vietnam so far, which is easier to argue for. Now he's about to say something extremely controversial. Perhaps a more difficult task is to speak for those who are our enemies. What about the VC, the Viet Cong, the communists? Crazy that he went there, but admirable. He's saying, wow, okay. Well, I'm sure someone with a lot of historical knowledge might actually have a strong reaction to what I just said, the word admirable, and I'd be curious what you might say. I'm not sure how admirable this is, but what I know is that it takes a certain amount of guts to say this, because this is going to be a crazy position to defend in that time, I'm assuming, to the audience. Now this actually makes me want to see what the New York Times and the Washington Post said, because I feel like they must have responded to this part in particular. He's basically saying, how can they trust us after all that we did? And when we accuse them of violence, just as we were being violent. Maybe we don't condone their actions, their rebellion, but we should understand their feelings. We press them to their violence. Our computerized plans of destruction are much greater than their greatest acts. Wow. Oh, oof. We call them all communists, even though less than 25% of them are communist. And these questions, all of these rhetorical questions, they're all from the perspective of the Viet Cong. Yo. The Saigon press is censored, so how can right? So he's just talking about, he's pointing out the American hypocrisy from the perspective of the Viet Cong. They are the only real party in real touch with the peasants. From the enemy's point of view, we may see the basic weaknesses of our condition, and if we are mature, we may grow from it. So too with Hanoi. When our bombs pummel the North, our mines endanger the North, we are distrusted. They distrust our intentions, and at the same time, those people are the people who fought for independence against the Japanese and the French. And they fought a second fight against French domination. I think there were two Indochina wars, and I think that's what we're referring to right now. Persuaded to give up the land at Geneva. And so after Geneva, they actually made concessions, but we actually prevented the elections that would have brought Ho Chi Minh to power. And they were like, the US is betraying us. Right, and the American troops, America broke the Geneva Agreement beforehand, before the North. So Martin Luther King is really laying it thick on the U.S. I mean, he's really saying everything from the VC point of view. Now, it just reminds me of some arguments about the Russian invasion of Ukraine that have existed since like years ago, that saying that the US should not provoke Russia by kind of dangling the NATO card at Ukraine. And that now Russia's response is a natural reaction to the fact that we've been dangling the NATO card at Ukraine, even though we knew that Russia would be upset by it. It's like the "I'm not touching you" thing. Like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. You're like practically poking your sibling, but you're not actually poking your sibling. So your sibling gets pissed and then punches you, and then you go and tell on your mom. It's like, oh, he punched me, right? It's kind of like that. That's the argument there, and right now, people who are saying that are being they're being reamed in social media. So it's I don't know if that's an appropriate parallel, but it is something that's happening right now. I'm not saying, I don't want to create a false equivalence between these people and Martin Luther King, or maybe it is equivalent. I don't know. I don't have a position on it yet, but it's one thing that's happening right now with Ukraine. Okay, we have betrayed the peace and we have betrayed their agreements many times. It's kind of the larger point here. I'm trying to give a voice to the voiceless. I'm trying to understand the arguments of those who are the enemy. But of course, I'm also concerned about our own troops equally. Because what we're doing to them is not just the brutalizing that happens in any war. Now we're also adding cynicism to them. Because none of the things we claim to be fighting for are real. And the more sophisticated surely realize that while we are on the side of the wealthy and the secure, we're creating a hell for the poor. This madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak as one who loves America. This is our initiative. We must stop it. This is the message of the great Buddhist leaders of Vietnam. One thing I'm noticing right now, just right now, is Martin Luther King was connected to not just the Buddhists in Vietnam, but also like even the rabbis in America. So he was he had a coalition that kind of spanned just the Christian religion. Now he speaks as a Christian, and only as a Christian. He speaks like the Son of God. He speaks the Christian language, but he actually allies with non-Christians as well. So that's one interesting thing. And maybe this is why he's able to express, unlike the Americans who are receiving their sort of arguments from, political figures in America, Martin Luther King seems to be receiving some of the news and some of the opinions of people on the other side through the Buddhists in Vietnam. And so just as a practical takeaway right there, it's just, if you ever want to know a fuller story, you want to have a fuller I don't want to use the word network, but a fuller I don't know if network's the right word, but a fuller network of people who trust you and people that you trust. The community, the broader your community of trusted people, okay, the easier it is for you to know the human truth around the world. Anyway, let's move on. The hatred increases each day the war goes on. They're forcing friends into enemies. They might be calculating military victory, but they're incurring deep psychological and political defeat. The image of America is being tarnished. If we continue, we will have we have no honorable intentions. The world will be left no other alternative. It demands maturity, that we admit our failure. We should bring a halt to this war. 5 things we should do to extricate ourselves from this nightmare. End the bombing. Which, guys, the bombing is a big deal. If you haven't gone into the high school curriculum yet, it's a big deal. A unilateral ceasefire. Just from me to you, I will stop firing, regardless of whether you stop firing. Right? A unilateral ceasefire. And hope that they will negotiate, which is, by the way, the humble position. It's not the position that hardline negotiators would take, because you're actually giving before you take. So this is probably, I bet that this part would, a lot of criticism would probably come on this part as well. Stop the military buildup and accept the National Liberation Front in future political dealings, in governing that area, and remove all foreign troops. And maybe we could even grant asylum. Man, this reminds me of the 20-year Afghanistan issue. Oh my God, the 20 years of Afghanistan, and that pullout has been delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and civilians, so many civilians died. It's such a anyway. Conscientious objection. Let us persuade the young men of our nation to object conscientiously, to object to this war. It is dishonorable, unjust. And if you are a minister, if you are a pastor, do not use the pastor status as an exemption from war. Instead, specifically apply as a conscientious objector. Tell them you don't agree. Tell the military, tell the government you don't agree. Take real choices. So he starts with the national actions, and now he's focusing on the individual actions that people can take. Even more disturbing. He's going even further. There is a far deeper malady within the American spirit. They will be concerned about Guatemala and Peru and Thailand and Cambodia and Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names without end, unless we need to. So it's actually all of American foreign policy in this Cold War that's the problem right now. In this sort of for Martin Luther King, this dichotomy is false of America, democracy, justice, and communism, inefficiency, evil. This dichotomy is false, and this false dichotomy is leading America to actually do unjust and dishonorable things abroad, not just in Vietnam, it's other places as well. So he's dropping a huge bomb here. That's probably not the right metaphor, sorry, but he is expanding his argument even farther here. This is a highly ambitious argument. It seems like we are on the wrong side of a world revolution. We are suppressing in Venezuela, we're trying to maintain our investments in Guatemala. Helicopters, napalm, Green Beret in Peru and Cambodia. 5 years ago, those who made peaceful revolution possible will make violent revolution inevitable. We are making peaceful revolution impossible. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. When we seek profit and property, dude, oh man. We can only be a good Samaritan. We need to actually fix the highway itself. We can't just be the good Samaritan on a constantly dangerous highway. A true revolution of values looks at the contrast of poverty and wealth. Wow. Martin Luther King is putting it all. This is like a manifesto, man. This is like everything. It keeps getting bigger and bigger. With righteous indignation. So he starts almost timid. But he keeps laying it on. We'll look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing in socially insensitive investments. The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. Now, obviously, these issues are extremely complicated, but I don't know. It's hard for me to express my my opinions on this, but this is a moral argument, and it's something about the attitudes of everyone in the world, in America. I'll just leave it at that. Burning human beings with napalm, filling nations with orphans and widows, of poisonous drugs of hate into people that are humane normally. We're destroying these people. We cannot reconcile this with wisdom, justice, and love. We spend more money on defense than on programs of social uplift. This is spiritual death. We're the most powerful nation in the world. We can lead the way in this revolution of values. So this is now appealing to America's sort of special status as the most powerful. We should be an example. This would be our best defense against communism. War is not the answer. Communism will not be defeated by war. We must not engage in a negative anti-communism, but rather in a positive thrust for democracy. And we need to take offensive, not negative action in behalf of justice. We must address poverty, insecurity, injustice. That's where communism grows and develops. Wow. That's a good argument. The shirtless and barefoot are rising up. We must support the revolutions of the shirtless and the barefoot, because they are naturally crying out against the old systems of exploitation. And it's sad, because of complacency, we are initiating though we initiated the revolutionary spirit of the modern world, now we are the anti-revolutionaries. Now only Marxism looks like it has a revolutionary spirit. We should actually be competing with Marxism to be the more sexy alternative. Yeah. I never heard this argument before about why. But this is such a nuanced argument that right now in my 21st century readings of Twitter and stuff, I'm seeing a lot of just pro-communist and anti-American arguments as a backlash to all of the sort of sins of America's past. But this is such a nuanced argument. Before, instead of being against communism or falling into the opposite extreme and just being for communism, be for these people and their needs. And their needs is to eradicate poverty, to have justice, to flourish and thrive. That's what they need. And communism is just the sexy philosophy of the day. Don't worry about the ideology. Don't group them as ideologues. Just communicate with them on their needs and make democracy the best solution for those needs. I mean, this is so obvious to say it, but it's crazy because people don't say it this way. They say it in a much more black or white way. And so this argument is actually huge, and it's something I don't really hear even today. This is super, I think this passage is super important. Oh man. Be loyal to mankind as a whole, beyond these little concepts of tribe, race, class. Unconditional love. It's not weak and cowardly to be loving unconditionally. I'm not talking about some sentimentality. I'm speaking of the supreme unifying principle of life that all great religions acknowledge. It unlocks a door that leads to ultimate reality. He's connecting all the religions. Let us love one another, for love is God. This should be the order of the day. We can no longer worship the God of hate or retaliation. Let me just double check. Okay. Just because I am going to fall behind in time. I need to make a quick announcement. Hang on, where are we? Tomorrow is today. We can't push it off until later. We have to work now. Procrastination is the thief of time. That's actually, isn't that a really famous quotation? It's from here. I'm not sure if it's from here because it says the word still. There's an invisible finger that records basically our actions. We must work now. Non-violent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. Speak for peace and justice. Otherwise, we'll be dragged down the shameful corridors of time reserved for those who possess power without compassion, who possess might without morality, strength without sight. This is talking about hell, by the way. It's a religious reference. It's a lot of quotations, honestly, but he's making very diverse quotations from all over. All different types of people. From different religions and whatnot. Make the right choice. Psalm of peace. Symphony of brotherhood. Justice rolled down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Okay. I felt that the speech was pretty long. I felt that it was pretty long, but I think what it is he's being extremely ambitious. And also, it is a speech, so it really depends on the vibe of that audience. How they're responding. And I wasn't doing a lot of work trying to imagine how the audience might be responding, although maybe next time I should. But for me, at least, it felt a little long, just in terms of rehashing a point from different angles. But there were several transitions that I thought were really notable. First was the transition from just sort of high level social reasons for why he's addressing this issue. That's the first 3 reasons, and then the next 4 reasons he gets more abstract, which is even more high level. So he went from lower level to actually higher level, but still becomes more abstract. Then he goes to the perspective of the peasant, and then the perspective of Vietnam and Viet Cong. That was crazy. Then he goes beyond Vietnam. He talks about the world and the American moral character and how it affects the entire world. And so there are all these transitions. And so he's making an extremely ambitious speech, and he knows he's going to take flack. And I think that's partly why he's really hammering in what he's standing for. And at the very end, he talks about being a positive force for democracy, not just a negative anti-force. And I think that was very persuasive. And I think it's the kind of thing we need more in society today. So I honestly, I probably went into this speech kind of, I set it up front. I said that I might not. I feel like I kind of know what the content is, but actually having read it was pretty different from what I was expecting, and I got a lot of new things from this. So I went in with an expectation level maybe out of 6 out of 10, but I'm coming out with a sense with a greater sense of having learned and gained value out of this. So I would strongly, I think the speech is worth reading. I think you should read the speech, and I think it really frames arguments for democracy in a more nuanced and mature and human and morally tenable way than a lot of times what you hear on just the news. I think it has a deep sympathy for people and thinks about people in a broader, more encompassing, more welcoming, more a warmer way. And I wish we had a voice like this that was prominent in our society today. I really do. I really wish we had a voice more like this. And it's sad that we don't have voices
Or maybe we do, but I just don't know. But it's sad that I'm not hearing these kinds of voices today. So I strongly recommend this speech, Beyond Vietnam, by Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, guys, that's it for the stream. I'll see you guys in the next one.